Equality, which is a disability equality and inclusion business, supporting other businesses to be inclusive of disabled people in the workplace. And I have a guest host today.
Hi, I'm Sarah. As Essie mentioned, I also run my own business, and it's called Sarah Role Inclusion, and I do inclusive consultancy, focusing more on strategic goals and strategy, but also on a broad spectrum of topics, so disability, unconscious bias, all of that. So yeah, if you want to check me out, do. I'm sure Essie will link my information to you.
I certainly will. And as usual, I will send the recording out of this webinar 72 hours after the webinar. So that will be on Thursday. And also I will ask you if you wouldn't mind clicking on a link to a feedback form. I will put Sarah's details in there as well. So for those of you who have joined one of our webinars before, you'll notice that we ask you if you would mind not using the chat box, if you can possibly, if it doesn't interfere with your own access requirements. It's only because for my access requirements as a disabled person, I find the chat box quite difficult to use. If you would like to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A box at the bottom. And then we will answer them at the end of the session. However, when you have a question, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end so that you don't forget what your question is. I will, however, be putting a link to an article in the chat box at the end of this session. I'll post it just before the session ends. However, if you don't see it because you've left or you can't access it, I will also be sending it out in the aftercare package as well. So if you can't download it at the time, that's fine. You'll have a second opportunity. Okay.
Okay.
Sarah, would you like to take over from here?
Yep, gladly. So we're going to start off with discussing a little bit about accessibility and inclusion and then differences between them. And the idea that one can't work without the other. For example, if you can't get in the door, you can't meet the inclusion culture. And so actually you have to think of them alongside each other. And that's going to be kind of a theme today where we'll explain more as we go through. I think that the important thing we'll touch on is engaging with people in general to know what works for them and making them feel valued and included in whatever you're hosting, whatever event it is. It cannot be just accessible. You don't feel included when you can't get in the front door. You don't feel included when you actually have to request assistance time and time again to do something. It's all about attitudes alongside the access requirements. And inclusive attitudes are a lot around active listening. It requires you to actively engage with the differences that people have and do your best to accommodate and make it a fair shot for everyone. Everyone can participate, everyone feels valued. That's a bit of a lame explanation. But
well, not lame explanation, it's just a short explanation, isn't it?
But depends, really. So Essie will discuss a little bit about the importance of accessible and inclusive events and how it may impact the people they are trying to engage with, and a quick discussion about online platforms and how we can support disabled people to feel included and part of the event. I think go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're absolutely right. We then, as usual, have a couple of action points that we would like you to think about if you want to take this further. And then we have time for your questions and answers at the end. So, as Sarah says, we want to explore kind of the difference between accessibility and inclusion. And Sarah quite rightly kind of summed it up in what she was saying. But a few weeks ago, we held a webinar with Sarah Teichler, who is an access auditor. And we were talking about this in a little bit more detail, and that there is quite a fundamental difference between accessibility and inclusion. But unless you think of both of them, it's not going to work for disabled people. They need to work in kind of conjunction with each other. So I think the easiest way to sum it up, along with what Sarah was saying, was that accessibility, you can have accessibility. So if we think about accessibility as far as a wheelchair user is concerned, is step-free access. So you could have step-free access into, let's say, a restaurant, through the back door, through the kitchen. So whereas everybody else is walking up a couple of stairs, going into a lovely grand entrance and being served by the person that's there to greet them, been taken to their table, the wheelchair user has to go round the side, through the kitchen, through all the chaos of the kitchen, if it's Gordon Ramsay, all the arguing and the yelling and the metaphoring and the swearing, and then through kind of all the food that's being cooked, delicious and otherwise, maybe past the bins, through a couple of probably not accessible doors, so they need to be opened manually by somebody else, probably quite a narrow pathway for a wheelchair user to use before getting into the restaurant and then going to the table. So you could say that that is accessible, that as the wheelchair user has successfully managed to get into the venue. But then the question then remains, well, is it inclusive? How did that person feel when they landed in the restaurant in the end? Did they feel welcome? Did they feel valued as a customer? Are they relaxed and ready to start their meal? Are they enjoying kind of the environment and the culture that you've set out? Probably not. I wouldn't anyway, unless I picked up a snack on the way in the kitchen. But, you know, all jokes aside, they're not going to feel included. So to be inclusive, you need to think about the access. So the step-free access has to be at the front, but then also you need to feel about how somebody is going to feel valued and be welcomed into your building. So obviously that restaurant example is just one example of many examples we could come up with. So another example could be a sight impaired person asking you to send out the slides before your online event so they can access. And then the host saying, oh no, we can't possibly do that, we don't have time, but we will read them out. Well, yeah, sure, you might read them out in the event, but that person can't engage fully in what the slides are showing. You might have some pictures, you might have some words on certain areas, which if the person could download them ahead of time and use their screen reader to view, then they would be able to access 100%. But they're only being able to access what you've given them access to. Therefore, they're not engaging in the event fully. So it's really important that we consider accessibility and inclusion as a whole. Sarah, do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I have one more point actually, linked to culture and feeling included.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the small stuff, guys. Like, you know, it's the having canapes and drinks in a reception is very stressful for someone who actually cannot hold a drink or a canapé or both at once. And then what you do, either don't drink or eat, or you continue to network and don't eat, or you go somewhere very far away from the actual event to eat and drink, aside, being excluded, and then rush through it to get into networking. The ways of mitigating those issues is to actually ask beforehand, engage beforehand, do you have any access requirements? And you might need to suggest things to make people think about what they have, what they need. So a lot of networking events that I attend, for example, will not have a seating area nearby, will be pretty much aimed at standing networking. But it's all well and good if you can stand for a long time, if you can hold a drink and a conversation at once. You know, it's a very difficult situation to mitigate for a person and to feel included. So by engaging first, by identifying proactively where you might want to adapt or accommodate better, you automatically make that person feel more valued and more welcome.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And we're not suggesting that all of these things can happen at the same time. It is, depending on the size of your organization and the size of your event and your budget, they may not all be possible. But by engaging in that communication, engaging with the disabled, with your audience, because you might not know who's disabled or not, engaging with your audience and saying, we really value your contribution. We want to do everything possible to make sure that you feel as engaged and included as possible in this event. This is what's going to happen. Are there any things that we could do to mitigate you not feeling included? For example, as Sarah says, and giving examples, and also being honest and open and saying, we'd love to do that, and thank you so much. Unfortunately, we can't do that at the moment. However, we do suggest that we're going to do this instead. So maybe having an alternative if you can't meet their requirements at the time. So you will have noticed, for example, that I've been able to install closed captions into these events because somebody specifically asked me for them. And I was at the time when she asked me, I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to do it or not. So I was very honest with the participant and said, I'm going to try. These are the things I'm thinking. And I listed about 3 or 4 things that I'd thought of. And I said, do you have any ideas of what you've done in the past? So asking your participants, if appropriate for their kind of experience, to help you to put something in place is also quite helpful. Because it might not be something as big as closed captions. It might be something really small. Like, as I said, could you please send the slides out ahead of the event? And that's really easy to do. That takes 2 minutes. But it really makes a difference to how somebody feels included and can engage in your event. And that's what you want. You don't put on an event to engage with people that can't engage. So it's meeting your needs as well as theirs.
And also, actually just to add to that a little bit, by acknowledging the requirement as important and valuable, even if you can't do it or don't have the funds to do it, by acknowledging it, you are actively engaging it, and you are making that person, through saying, I will try my best, or we recognise that's really important, and we're going to try to make it happen. Even by addressing the issue like that, you are automatically becoming more inclusive, and that's such an important window to keep open. And when you can definitely invite them at work, but you invite and you aim to be inclusive as possible.
Absolutely. Sarah, as usual, because we're both really passionate people about the subject, we've overrun on this area a little bit, but it's so important. What I'm going to do quickly, if we can, is take us back to discuss online platforms and disability inclusion. And then if there's something in our notes that I can't see at the moment that we haven't covered in inclusion, we'll do that, if that's cool. So online platforms and disability inclusion. I took part in a webinar last week that was hosted by Purple Space, and the CEO of Purple Space had been doing a survey from all of the clients they've been working with, and they work with anything from big corporations to small non-for-profit organisations. And what she was saying, the results of her survey showed that many disabled people, disabled employees working within those organisations, feel a lot more engaged and a lot more included in the workplace culture, purely because the barriers that prevented them in society, in the workplace, feeling included and being part of those conversations have been broken down because everybody's working from home. Obviously, that is not the case for everyone. Some people feel very isolated, some people may feel a lack of control, and some people may feel all sorts of things as a result of the isolation. So not all disabled people are going to feel the same, but it was quite interesting to note that the barriers that are usually preventing disabled people from being included have been mitigated. And I think through what she was saying, I think that's a lot to do with attitude. So obviously a lot of it is the physical environment that people are in, but a lot of it is the attitude. So by that I mean, in the workplace, people kind of creating an ad hoc huddle in a room that's perhaps up a couple of stairs or in that has not much space around it to have a quick update about what's going on. They make a decision, they move off. But actually, because it's so quick and the huddle's so hard to get to, that disabled person who, whatever impairment they have, it might be a wheelchair user, it might be a sight impaired person that can't see the huddle, it might be a hearing impaired person that can't hear what people are saying, can't access. So by moving all of those chats online and over the phone means that everybody is being engaged at the same time. So just putting a bit more, if we do, and we will end up going back in the workplace, by putting an extra piece of thought into what we're doing and how we're doing it, supports disabled people to feel included. And that, relating to this, is a really good opportunity to open up your engagement with your events to be inclusive of disabled people. It's not all easy, but there are lots of technology and lots of pieces of equipment that you can use that cost money or don't cost money to make sure that disabled people can access the event and can get the most out of it, especially online. And I think, as I said before, a lot of disabled people know what they need in order to engage in an online event. So just saying, you know, do you have any, what in your experience, what works for you, might help you come up with some of the solutions.
I agree.
Was there anything else under the communication in our notes that we haven't covered, only because I can't see them?
I can't see this for one. Apologies, guys, we're just having a bit of technical issues here. Hang on. Doesn't look like it, Effie.
Okay, well that's good. It's because we know what we're talking about, Sarah.
Well,
okay, so creating an inclusive event. So we want to talk to you a little bit about virtual events and face-to-face. So Sarah, did you want to kick us off there? Talking about the importance of creating the events and how to make sure that most things are covered.
I think, like, I mean, from personal experience, I started hosting an event last year, and it was baptism by fire because I just threw myself into it, and learned a lot through that. And actually, coming from an inclusion professional inclusion sphere, I was obviously more clued in than the typical person without knowledge on access to inclusion. But even with that, I found it difficult. So it's not an easy feat, but we just have to. You know, it's not an option anymore not to. And I feel like what Essie was saying about engagement, you can also empower people by asking what they want, what they need.
Mm-hmm.
Empower people by becoming vulnerable yourself and think, actually, I don't know what you need to access this event, but I would like to do what I can to make it happen. For example, if you have sight impaired, visually impaired people without the use of a white cane or dog, we provide guide people for those people, or if they need it, we require a safe space outside the room for if you have anxiety or panic attacks, or even just want a break. Say that you can have an open door policy. You can actually, you know what, we recognise that this might be a bit long or tough for you, please do feel free to go to the outside room where it will be there'll be a person there to chat to or whatever you need. But it's about personability and engagement in those personal terms to help support and lift and feel and push value at like this. We want to make this as valuable and inclusive as we can through different steps.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with what you're saying. No, I completely agree with what you're saying, Sarah. I think about a month ago, I wrote a blog on this very subject, how to make your events inclusive. I was talking about the physical space rather than the online space. But one of the things that I mentioned in the blog is that, as Sarah is very well pointing out, it is so important to keep those communication levels up. You might not have all the answers, you might not be able to present everything, but to communicating what your desired outcomes are is so important as well. And the other thing I was saying in the blog is, just, you know, if you see first time you don't have the feedback results that you're expecting, don't think that it's not working. It might be that it's what people expected in the first place and they don't see a need to contact you. Or it might be that you've given them the information they need, so therefore they don't need the need to contact you. So just because you don't see the results doesn't mean the results aren't happening. And you might over time see an increase in disabled people attending your events. And also, don't forget that disability isn't all visible. Disability is hidden. So there might be more disabled people attending your events with invisible disabilities that you might not even know weren't attending in the first place. So communication is always going to make a difference, even whether it's a visible difference to you or not. So yeah, keep doing it. Keep up the good work. I found my notes. Woohoo! So, and I think Sarah was also saying communication all the way through. So communication at the beginning, telling people what's happening, what to expect, and where they can ask for support is really important. Communication throughout the event is really helpful. So maybe in your introduction, in that kind of the housekeeping part, you mentioned about the support that's available for people at the event, and where to go and get it and how to access it. And then again, following up those communication methods after your event as well. So asking people how they found it, what could be improved in the future, and whether, as you say, they want to be kept on your mailing list, but whether they want to be kept on the mailing list in terms of, you know, those physical access parts as well would be really helpful, because if you get more disabled people willing to engage with you on your mailing list, then you have a bigger group of people then to go to ask for support in the future, to ask for their advice and their feedback. You might want to use that group to create online focus groups, to turn your events into even more inclusive events than they are right now. So talking about virtual events, so when we're hosting virtual events, I mean, a lot of the principles of communication are exactly the same. So you want to engage with people at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of the event as well, to see, you know, how they're getting on, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Don't be scared of perceivably negative or critical feedback, because you can use that to improve on your access in, you're the next time and the next time, looking at good practice from other events. I have a link that I'm going to link to you at the end to tell you what this other organisation is doing to make sure their virtual events are inclusive of disabled people. And also the blog I've written might help you with that as well, that I'll send you a link to. Also, there are other things that you can do, again, in your virtual and in your face-to-face events that help disabled people to feel included. So, for example, like I do, having the facility to read out, if you're having the slides, reading out what's on the slides. So, as I said, some people might ask you for the slides ahead of time, some people might not. Sometimes it might not even be make a difference to them. So, for example, somebody with dyslexia, for example, it won't matter whether it might not matter if they get the slides a week before or 5 seconds before at the event. They might still need help accessing what's on the slides. So reading out the slides as a point of practice in the first place is always best practice, I would say. And then people don't need to alert you to any access requirements in that field because you're doing it for them anyway. Things like closed captions are really helpful. They're not always accessible to every organisation or business because they can be expensive to have somebody to type them out for you if you don't have anyone within your office to do that for you or fast enough. However, there are free resources that you can use, for example, if you have Microsoft Word. So on the Microsoft Office platform, on PowerPoint, PowerPoint has a resource at the bottom to type closed captions, automated captions, and they might not always be perfect, but I have practiced them and they are pretty accurate. Also, I know Zoom is in beta. They're testing out a system where they have automatic closed captions as well. And I've seen that work. And that, again, is quite accurate. So these things are developing all the time. Sarah, do you have any other pieces of advice for online event, making them accessible and inclusive?
I think that one quite a big one is actually the mode of communication in the virtual event and physical event is there will always be a preference in communication style because everyone's different.
Mm-hmm.
If we enable as many communication modes as possible, we therefore engage with a lot more people in the way that they need to be engaged with, in a mode that they prefer or mode that they can use. And that, again, makes not only makes people feel included, but it puts them at ease knowing, oh, this person really thought about this,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have any reason to worry.
Mm-hmm. And
I noticed, we actually do it without thinking at the start, but we do we direct people to where they can type, where they can speak, because actually, if a person's not comfortable speaking typically across a bit virtual platform, enable them and alert them to use the other option available so that they're comfortable. And it's all about making comfort and building trust, which then builds confidence and people feel much more able and willing to engage in the content, and therefore you'll get much more out of it. You'll all get much more out of it because actually you're having those, you're making those people feel worth it and valuable and contribute.
Yeah, I agree. I will say though, but thank you for saying that it seems like that. But the, directing people where to put their comments and their questions is not seamless. It's something that was trial and error for me, and I do think it's important to note, because what was happening when I started this webinar series was that people were writing in the chat box and they were writing in the Q&A, and I, as a physically disabled person myself, was finding it very, very difficult to keep up. And therefore, I came up with the solution that worked for me as a presenter, to ask people to do things a certain way unless it inhibited their ability to engage. Because it's important as a presenter that I can be in control of the presentation. I mean, obviously, we've had a few errors, but I could, I half plan for that and say, oh, Sarah, would you mind just taking over here while I do this? So that I'm not scrambling around, and as a participant, you're not waiting half an hour for me to get back onto the spot. So I think it's really important as the presenter and a host of the online event for you to feel confident in saying, well, this isn't working for me, I want to try something else. Because actually, if I want my audience to feel engaged and feel valued and feel that they've had a valuable hour, I need to feel confident and I need to feel secure in delivering the way that I need to deliver. And that, I think that goes for access, like disability related access requirements or non-disability related access requirements. I think just as a flat rule, as the presenter or the host of an event, you need to feel that confidence to be in control of what you're delivering, especially when you're delivering on your own. It's all right when you can say to somebody else, oh, can you just do this while I sort this out? But if you're delivering on your own, you need those things up your sleeve to be able to jump at the top of a hat. But as Sarah was, sorry, I saw you open your mouth to talk. But as Sarah was also saying, it's so important to say, this is how I would prefer it to be. However, if this impedes on your access requirements, then please do feel free to put something in the chat box. And as a host, being flexible and agile to see where things are coming from, in order for those people who cannot do the things that you've asked them to do to still feel engaged and still feel as though they can contribute the way they want to. My apologies, Sarah, I interrupted you.
I mean, just to add a little bit to that, I mean, we earlier when I was, when you were having a bit of a tears and you asked me to take over.
Never have a clue.
But that wasn't, I wasn't as lucid and people like that, but I wasn't as prepared as I'd like to be for that. But I did it anyway because we needed some support. But this is exactly why I think it can be useful to have another person in your corner, but especially online, because there's so much we can't see about our audience, and when we have the capacity and ability to enable support for ourselves, we then feel more able to present confidently.
Absolutely.
And what you were saying, I think, it was just, I wanted to point out the example that happened half an hour ago with me that wasn't fully prepared, but did it anyway. And I think that's just a lot about a team when they're willing to do that.
I think so, and I think that you highlighted exactly the right point, but it needed to be highlighted again, that and unless you feel comfortable as a host, you can't help your participants to feel comfortable and confident in you as the expert. So it is so important that you have all the tools, whether it's the people, whether it's the equipment. I sit here with my laptop and my iPad that usually doesn't let me down, next to me, so that I can use both to fully access what I need to access in order for my participants to get value out of what we're delivering for them. And it's so important. The other thing that I wanted to mention as a tool that is vital to use when having your virtual events, not just closed captions during the events, but subtitles and closed captions for when you publish your events. So, I mean, this is, as people say all the time, this isn't just helpful, and nor is anything else we're talking about actually just helpful purely for disabled people. As we always say, if you're inclusive of disabled people, you're not excluding other people, you're just being inclusive of everyone.
Actually, that can, I mean, sorry to jump in here, like, but the reason we're hiring home inclusion, that the difference between access and inclusion is actually being inclusive makes it easier for everyone to access.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about access and inclusion, access is being invited to the party, and inclusion's more like being asked to dance. So it's an active process, and it takes time, effort, but it's worth it. And actually, you will see benefits from across the board if you are truly inclusive in your engagement and your communication, and the rapport and trust you build with your fellow delegates.
Absolutely. So just returning for a second to subtitles. So obviously subtitles help people on a busy train who perhaps can't put the sound on, in an office who perhaps can't put the sound on, but also it supports disabled people with hearing impairments. Really, really important to note. So if you can subtitle, and there are a couple of really good, well, actually 3 that I can think of off the top of my head, really good online resources that you can tap into. One is temi.com, where actually you can upload your recording and it will transcribe it for you on the spot. Another one is rev.com, where you can send it off and it comes back transcribed within 24 hours. And then the third one is Otter, as in like otter in the water, .ai. That again, you upload it and it transcribes it for you. And those are all very inexpensive, so I definitely recommend them as well. On that note, with subtitles for people with hearing impairments, I keep noticing over and over again at the moment that people are sharing videos with no sound. So they might, so no sound in terms of no speaking, so no dialogue in the video. So the dialogue comes from words on the screen, which is all very well if you can read the screen, but if you have a sight impairment or you have dyslexia or something, then you're not going to be able to read it. So when you're designing your content, think about how the majority of people are going to be able to access and engage that content as well. So, you know, if it is reading, make sure that you can read it out on the screen. Maybe send it out to participants blanket before, because you might not know who needs that access requirement or not, so that people can have it beforehand and download it, even if it's an hour, and they can have it on their computer to use with their equipment, or insert some kind of dialogue and closed captions / subtitles into your video, so that the majority of people can access.
I think it's an important point that we address the gap in the inclusive online events ability right now, because actually there's something we haven't talked about, and it's sign language users and people who are deaf. And it's important to note that actually it's very difficult to make an online event accessible for sign language users without an interpreter, because actually the sign language in British sign language BSL is a different grammatical structure to English. So how to written English. And so even giving the closed captions or the subtitles may be all a hearing impaired person may need. It may not fulfill that requirement because actually it's a different language. And this is where the unfortunate gap in the access with online events does really show, and we need to develop a system and an affordable way of doing that without excluding those who are deaf and sign language users.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I think, as Sarah says, you know, there, like as usual, there are many areas that we haven't covered. These webinars are purely a introduction to the subject for you to start thinking about it, and then to think about what you need to do next. We cannot possibly cover everything in this topic in 1 hour, unfortunately, because we talk very fast, and then that's not inclusive of anyone, really, is it? But thank you very much, Sarah. You're absolutely right. So I'm going to go on to a couple of action points before we go on to any Q&A. We have a question in the Q&A box already, so if anyone has any more, please do feel free to put them in there. So the first action point that we have come up for you is to prepare your own list of inclusivity for your online or your face-to-face event. So what can you do that's inexpensive, perhaps if you don't have the budget for it, that you can do that to be inclusive of the majority of people and the majority of disabled people, whilst recognizing that it might not be possible to put everything in at once. So in a minute, I'm going to share a link of, as I said, an organization that shared their good practice for inclusive virtual events with you that might give you some tips. But think about what you might put in your checklist. And if you create that checklist, you could share it with your team, share it with your wider organization, so that every part of your organization is starting to be inclusive of disabled people and to thinking about them in their virtual events. And this list can be grown on. So you might want to take some of the things that we've talked about already, like for example, communication, and at the points where you communicate with your participants, asking them if they have any access requirements, telling them what's expected, telling them what support is available, and then also getting their feedback and using that feedback to improve your services going forward. And it might also be the way you communicate, so the words and the language that you use. And you might want to go back to our language and terminology webinar to have a think about the language you use. So using proactive, engaging language that shows disabled people that you value their contribution and that you will value their participants at the event. Maybe using some images to show people what the event is. It might just be a screenshot of one of your other events, hopefully with people smiling as well. That encourages people to come. Maybe some testimonials from some of your disabled participants saying how inclusive and accessible the event was to them, and things like that. And then secondly, we would like you to think about how you can communicate with your customers before and after the event. So I just summed up some of that, but actually having a written strategy for that communication, so that it's, you know, it can be branded, and it also can be, the message doesn't change from team to team, that it's the same message, that you have that consistency throughout. Again, in this link that I'm going to send you just now, there's some really good examples of how they really nicely engage with the people that email them about access requirements, and just setting the standard, but also setting expectations, saying we really want to be able to support you, but some of the things that you may ask for may not be accessible to us as a business at the time, but we will work to make it work for you. Sarah, do you have anything to add while I send this link out?
I think that this is the one important take-home message for me definitely from this is not to assume.
Yeah.
Because assumption always leads to misinformation, and the way to mitigate that is to ask these questions.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we encourage ownership, we encourage co-creation, and that is a very powerful tool actually to getting an event to be its most inclusive. And this is what we try and encourage in online, virtual, and face-to-face events. So if you haven't done, you think about it in a way that you want to be approached by someone. You know, it's not. It requires rapport, it requires trust, and it requires engagement. Yeah.
I agree, and I completely agree, and I think that trust one is so important as well. If you just received an email tomorrow, Sarah, from a random person and Celebrating Disability, this company that you've never heard of before, saying, "What are your access requirements?" Would you be like, "Oh, I'll tell you," or "No, I'm staying away from that email"? So developing that trust, explaining why you are asking this question and what you are going to do with the result, is so important as well. To develop that trust. And I think that not making assumptions is so important. So I've given you some generalistic things that you can put into events to make it inclusive for a majority of people, but that doesn't mean that there aren't more and that it will work for everyone. So I can talk to you as a mobility impaired wheelchair user, but it doesn't mean another mobility impaired wheelchair user won't need anything else. So absolutely not making those assumptions, and that is as relevant, or a bit more relevant even, for face to face. Because if you know that, again, you're getting that mobility impaired wheelchair user, and there's 3 of them coming, don't assume that they all, we all need the same things. I have lots of disabled friends who have exactly, well, the same impairment as I do, but they all mean different things to the disabled people. So yeah, asking those questions, not making those assumptions, and being flexible and agile. So if that disabled person turns up to your event on the day, in the event, and says, "Oh, I can't read the slides, would you mind sending them to me?" Are you able to send them? Is there somebody else with remote access that's able to take their email address and quickly send them the slides? That would be great if there was. And that's why, I quite often invite Sarah to join me, so that when things do go wrong, or if people were going to ask me for something, Sarah could take over and I could do that, or she could do the technical bit and I could meet the requirement. Sarah, I saw you were going to say something.
I think that it comes again from having the wherewithal to be kind and compassionate toward everyone. And actually, we haven't touched on this yet at all, but we will do on Thursday's event. Actually, mental health can come into it, and anxiety. And if someone is too anxious to speak, but they have a really great point, you want to hear that point. You want to know what that point is. And actually, by diversifying your communication methods in and actually stating that you have got diverse communication methods available to contribute, that person's anxiety will go from here to here, and you can't see that pushing up,
going upwards,
like putting up. But actually, that can reduce someone's anxiety, because actually that will be a huge relief that they can still contribute and be valuable,
but stay anonymous.
And then, but not in the typical confident way we all assume people can do.
Yeah.
In learning the ropes as you go, and being open to change, as Essie said.
I think you're so right, and I think you were so right on the point of people's confidence. And you know, for example, if another point on that, for example, if people's mental health status fluctuates when the event is coming up, and they've been really looking forward to engaging and learning for the event, if they know that, for example, you are going to be releasing the recording of the event, somebody might not feel as obliged to turn up on the day as they would otherwise, because they would still want to have the content but feel as though they can't, you know, contribute the way that they want to, but there is another opportunity. So there are so many benefits, as we were saying, about communicating and about being flexible and agile of people. Yes. So just before we finish today, we have a question. If there are any more, I think we have time, because this is a quick question. I think we have time for a couple more as well. So Charlotte says, can I ask which closed captioning third-party provider are you using, or is it someone typing? So Charlotte, it's actually somebody typing. This is the Layla you see in the corner with the mute button on. Layla is from an organisation called Take Note, and I can put the details of Take Note in the what's it called? The email that I send you in a few days. But Take Note are actually a note-taking service where they go along either virtually or face-to-face to people's meetings, and they transcribe the meeting for them. So when I was asked if there was any way we could have closed captions, they were the first people I contacted. There are obviously cheaper options. Some of them I've discussed. So I would try, for example, the one on PowerPoint. The webinar I participated in as a participant last week by Purple Space, they used PowerPoint, and I was watching the closed captions to see how accurate they were, and I have to say they were very accurate, and they went over and corrected their own mistakes as well. So I thought that was really good. It does mean that you'd have to have a share screen up the entire time though, but I would say if you want a physical note taker, maybe all you need is somebody that types fast, because you can share responsibilities with other people on platforms like Zoom as well. So yeah, so thank you very much for your question, and as I said, I'll put the details of that company in the email that I send out in a few days. So thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. I really hope you found it useful. It was really fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. And as we mentioned at the beginning, Sarah and I are hosting, where Sarah will be taking the lead and the host, on the 18th, which is on Thursday. That's not a very, it doesn't help people when you pull that face to have, Sarah's brilliant. She'll be absolutely brilliant. We're hosting an event on the 18th of June at 1 p.m. on mental health and mental well-being in the workplace. So it'd be really good if you could join us. It's on Zoom as usual. What is slightly different about this event is it will be a meeting, so we will be encouraging people to interact if they feel able to. So it might be a really good opportunity, whilst learning a little bit about mental health in the workplace, to learn a little bit about inclusive ways of delivering a training session. And the session is also for an hour and a half. So it'll be from 1 till 2:30. So it'd be really great to see you there. Sign up as usual via the Eventbrite page, the Celebrating Disability Eventbrite page. All the information and the registration will be on there. I would say don't wait for me to send out an email about that, as the follow-up email from this won't come out till Thursday. It will be too late. So please do go on the Eventbrite page as soon as possible if you're interested in signing up. Thank you very much again for joining us, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye, have a good afternoon.
Bye everyone, cheers.